I list here at the bottom of this slide 4 models, and there are many, but I list these 4. The first one is in terms of course management, a platform for putting your course, class list, grades, and so forth. And the commercial models would be Blackboard or WebPC or probably some others. But the open source model that we use is Sakai. And a number of universities in the U.S. are switching from a proprietary to an open source course management system. Moodle is another one that is a little bit easier to use, but I think perhaps a little bit less flexible, and that is a typical trade-off. Then you can look at an institutional model. The very creative and I think courageous statement that the president of MIT made was supporting OCW. If you stop and think about it, that was a truly remarkable event. All of us wish that our presidents would do something like that. We heard some very nice comments this morning from the local rector. So the single discipline focus, there's a number of them. The one I'm fairly familiar with is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, where they are sort of the expert in that particular area. So that's what they've chosen to do. The Commons model, the repository model, is what Connexions has chosen, and it's what, in a certain sense, what Wikipedia does, where you have a repository of content of various sorts, and people can put things into it. You're restricted as to what you can do in terms of taking things out of it. A quick background for Connexions. In 1999, Richard Baranek, the co-author on this work, came to me as Dean of Engineering and said, "Sid, I'm going to write a textbook because this subject, a junior level electrical engineering subject, doesn't have a good textbook." I responded, "Rich, you're crazy. You're going to spend 5 years, 5 of the most productive years of your life, writing a book that will sell a few hundred, maybe a few thousand copies. Nobody else will like it except you. It'll be a compromise. All books are a compromise. There's 100 books on that topic right now. You're going to write a 101st book?" Well, that, isn't that a wonderful thing to have your dean say to you? You're crazy. He said, I can't find a good book. I said, well, do something new. Do something truly new. Use modern technology. Use modern sociology, anthropology, brain science. Do something, but don't write another book that the publisher then ends up owning the copyright to. And you get peanuts. Well, Rich came up with this analogy, the analogy between the music world and the educational world. And what he said is, in the music world, you have composers, performers, listeners, this hodgepodge of people that keep up with each other, and they'll take a little piece out of one piece of music and another out of other, and oh, you play the riff just like so-and-so does, or the saxophone or the piano, or he played. Rich is a musician, he's a guitar player. And so he sees that world as being highly interconnected, actually mainly through the internet, which is a very modern phenomenon. But it is an interactive community of people that share. Occasionally they get crosswise, usually when there's some copyright issue at play. But the musicians themselves are a community. And the music is sort of a communally created music. I can give you plenty of examples about that. He said, in contrast, the educational world, you spend 5 years, you write a book, and in technology, when your book is finished, it's already obsolete. The world has moved while you were writing the book, and so you spend 5 years of your life. I know I've written several books. 5 years of your life, and you produce an obsolete object. And 2/3 of that object you didn't really want to write, but you had to make a full book. There's 1/3 of it you loved, and you wrote it. The other 2/3, you did it because you need a complete book. Last semester, I taught a course in digital signal processing. The best book I could find had 1,000 pages, cost $150, and I was only interested in a small fraction of it. Now, a few of the students bought the book, and at the end of the course, they sold it. You know, a sizable amount of their resources were tied up in that book. They can't afford to create their own personal library. Bad things are going on in the traditional publishing arena. That book was in color. It had more things than you can possibly imagine. Most of them I didn't like, I didn't want. But the base content was good. So the idea of connecting, which is the way where the connections, the cute word connections came from, was to connect ideas first, so that the person who is told to study partial differential equations discovers that that's connected to the shape of your automobile, and that's connected to actual products that make a difference in the marketplace. The person who studies Fourier analysis discovers that you can actually analyze the human genome. All of a sudden, these ideas, which are disconnected in the university, can be connected. You study physics, you study chemistry, you study history, you study literature, with separate departments, separate instructors, separate books. The student is supposed to integrate all of that and become an educated person. But we're not educated because we have these highly specialized, highly separated, slightly obsolete disciplines. So the term connections came into being. And we've looked at alternative names, we still like connections. But the second one is we connect people. So it's connecting ideas, and it's connecting people for collaborative work. The authors, and this poor discouraged looking fellow up here, is sitting in his room, pretty disconnected from everyone else, writing a book. And down here we have teachers in a classroom, and this is a high school teacher. High school teachers are not supposed to write books. That's not their place. You know, professors write books. High school teachers teach out of books, and certainly students are not involved with either the writing of books or with the teaching. But we have these communities, and if you're not, if you don't have English as at least a second language, you're often shut out of the publishing world. So it's at least the high-paying publishing world. So down here, we talk about the shutouts. A variety of languages, a variety of geographic locations, and a variety of positions in the educational framework. So what we're proposing in this oval picture is supposed to be a vinyl record. Some of you will remember vinyl records and slide rules and analog watches and old technologies like that. We're proposing that all of this be in some kind of community, various languages, various people, information out of various books, and we use this create, rip, mix, and burn. Now, a few of you may be puzzled by those words, but the term rip is a fairly new word that came into being for taking content off of a CD and putting it usually in a compressed format on your PC or your computer. Mixing, well, you know what that is. I take things and scoot them around. I put together a set of songs that I like, not some publisher, not even the performer, but that I want. I mix them. Then burn, that doesn't mean a fire. What it means is creating a new CD. You burn a CD. And that new CD is a collaborative effort of me, the mixer, the performers, the authors of the music, a whole community. And I come out with a CD, an instantiation of my process. Well, one of the most important features of our system is that we chose XML as the underlying technology, the format, the protocol. It would have been much easier to choose something else. Maybe a Microsoft product, maybe PDF, HTML, something else. But XML is still in its infancy, but it's not a total infant, it's coming along. And most browsers will support some form of XML. now, at least with plugins. So the information is put into small modules or chunks into a common repository under a Creative Commons attribution license, which, by the way, allows commercialization. And that is our commons. That is our repository of these information objects. How much is in a module? It could be half a screen. It could be a chapter of a book. It could be whatever makes sense in your situation. If you're intending it for interactive use at the screen, you might write it one way. If you're using it for later printing out as a book, you might write it another way. Better yet, you'll write it both ways. So the user has the option. The modules can be assembled into a course or a textbook. Here is a 300-page electrical engineering textbook that came out of modules, primarily from one person, Don Johnson. Here is another DSP book by Mendo, a professor at the University of Illinois, who taught a short course in Hanoi a couple of months ago. He sat down and over a weekend created this book. It has 14 co-authors who've written the modules that were used. Every module in here was written by a true expert in their area, completely uncompromised. I don't really like Z transforms, but I do like FFTs. Then, you know, you write the FFT, and you write the Z transform, and you write this, and you write that. Put them in so that the people can choose, oh, I want physics without calculus. Well, I want physics with calculus. I want this, I want that. Fine, whatever you want, you put it in, and it's available to the wider community. And the reason this is remarkable is he assembled it, and within 2 days, the students had it in their hands. This physical book, in their hands. Now this is a real book, and I'll pass it around. It's got a table of contents, it's got an index, it's got footnotes, it's got references, it's got all the things, it's got curves, pictures, whatever. Everything you could expect a book to have. This book cost $11. That includes the cost of the mailing, includes the cost of the printing, it includes everything that was done. So Mingo has a wonderful product there, and it took him a weekend. Let's say you're teaching in a community college. You go in the first day with 50 students, you give a diagnostic quiz. That evening you sit down and compose a book. No more, no less than what those students need. Well, this book is a little bit sort of bimodal. Half of them have a background in factoring polynomials and half don't. Okay, you publish 2 books. Well, so you publish 3. You publish 50. Every person can have a book for themselves. Well, there's no economy of scale. No, this is totally linear. Buying 5 books costs 5 times as much as buying 1 book. Well, and several people in this audience wear glasses. You have visual problems. You want the book, this same book, printed out in larger fonts? It costs you no more. Right? Amazingly flexible, all because of XML. You can do it in other technologies, but nowhere nearly as easy. It allows the kind of dynamic, interactive, learner-centered pedagogy that we see today is very important. It allows it, but you're the one who has to create it. And so that's what I want to emphasize, the platform nature of this system. As Dean of Engineering, as Professor of Engineering, as 40 years studying engineering, one of the things that comes out is just simply being absolutely true. When there is a major change in technology, it occurs in 2 phases. One, where the new technology simply does what the old technology did, only better. And the second phase, where it invents the future. Applications occur that you couldn't have dreamed of in the beginning. Or if you dreamed of them, they were wrong. You occasionally, right? But usually the second phase is very difficult to predict. For the term unintended consequences, which is a term in economics very often where you have a policy and there ends up being unintended consequences. Now, Google scanning books and putting them in a repository. Is that phase 1 or phase 2? It's phase 1. Those books were never intended for digitization. That's something you added on. So what Google is doing, what Don Junction is doing in this book right here, phase 1, you're taking something you could have published by traditional means and you're doing a better job. Or you have online education. You have a talking head and some PowerPoint slides and some supplementary information. Yeah, it's called a classroom. We do it all the time. But you're just putting it on the web. All of that, phase 1. Well, it turns out that a lot of projects fail because they try to jump immediately to phase 2. And the fact of life is, just like a human being developing, you've got to crawl, then you learn to toddle, and you finally walk, you finally run. If you say, I want to run first, it doesn't work. Playing the piano, you generally have to go through a laborious process to learn and practice to become an excellent pianist. So most of what we're doing, even in some of the very best projects, you know, MIT's OCW, a lot of our connections, a lot of the projects, they're phase 1. We know what the students need, and we're going to provide it in a better, more efficient, more up-to-date, more open format. But part of what intrigues me is, what about that second phase that we can't really see yet? How do we keep that as open as possible? But you can't have it too open or you never make progress. Openness has two edges to it, a good one and a bad one. And I want to have the good aspects, and I don't want the bad ones. Well, my mother a long time ago told me that was not a possibility. So in the early days of movies, you had a play, and you set up a camera, and you took a picture of a play being performed. Only later did people learn you can do much more with movies than just simply transport something in geography and time that you already had as a play. So you had a Shakespearean performance, and now you can scatter it around with video. Well, I want to do things that you could never have done with a play in a fixed position, but I don't know what I want yet. That's where we're moving with the open educational projects. A very important aspect is quality control, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with Wikipedia. Wikipedia is an absolutely stunning accomplishment. I think far greater than Jimmy Wales ever imagined. Now, he might not say it now, but I'll bet a nickel that he didn't imagine just what it would turn into and how successful it is. I use Wikipedia all the time. I use it for math. I use it for science. I use it for engineering. I don't use it too much for political advice, but I don't use books for that either. I have friends and colleagues in the brain, so I am cautious about some of the issues that end up being most controversial in Wikipedia. The other part is actually remarkably good. There's some errors in it. There are errors in Britannica. There are errors in all encyclopedias. You can fix them a whole lot faster in Wikipedia than any of the others. What we are proposing is a quality control or a peer review system that is a post-publication system rather than pre-publication. In many ways, it's the same as any peer review system. It's just that you put it into the commons, into the repository first. And then a person who is competent, or a group that's competent to judge it, will say, I certify this. I don't certify that. I certify this. The American Medical Association will certify certain content is meeting their standards. And the other, they don't say. And I think it's best for one not to say negative things, because you may end up making a fool of yourself. Just simply don't say anything. So the IEEE, the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineers, they will certify some material. We've got a number of institutions, but the people who are doing the review are the proper people. It's not Connections. It's the people in the discipline who have the expertise. Now, this system will scale. The conventional system will not. Most of you are aware that the traditional peer review system for journals is broken, and it's not fixable. It inherently has a bottleneck. Where I write a paper, there's only 5 people in the world that are competent to review them, and 3 of those have conflicts of interest. And one of them is my mother. It's some personal something that makes it not objective. So that system is broken and is not going to ever get well. It needs to be completely redone. And that's going on in organizations that a number of you are involved with. But what we're proposing is this post-review by organizations, by individuals. I'll have what would be equivalent to a blog, and it says, I like the following Connexions modules. And some of you know me and you trust me, so it's fine. And then I won't bother looking around, I'll just take what Sid chose. It's a fascinating concept. One of the places we got the idea was in a poster session at a conference. You walk into a room with posters. All you have to do is pause for a moment. You know where the good information is, where the people are. And some poor guy over in the corner with a poster, nobody in the front, either it's bad information or it's a bad topic. You know, there's a reason why nobody goes over there. So you can get much more information after it's out there than you can before. And I can give you stories, I'm sure all of you have stories, of published results that are wrong. I mean, like an algorithm that's wrong. There's sort of nothing worse than having an algorithm with an error. I mean, that's just sort of an absolute disaster. There are others that are more controversial and opinion-based. But there's a lot in science and engineering and mathematics that you don't want errors. So we have, I think, the support for a system. Do we have the system? Nope. AMA is going to have to do that. I am not going to judge high-quality medical content. Somebody else will. But I can build a system that has the hooks that allow that to happen. So we're using this idea of a lens. So the IEEE, when I look through the lens, I don't see the whole repository. I see a little subset that the IEEE says is good stuff. The Open University of Catalonia, you construct your lens, and you look in and you see the material that you have deemed good for the instructors, good for the students, or maybe make 3 lenses, depending on what the community is. UNESCO, you guys can have a lens and look at the material that you think should be, meet your criterion, whatever that turns out to be. It's not for me to judge. So this idea of a lens to view something, and the idea of a post-publication review rather than a pre-publication review, I think is going to scale. I think it's going to satisfy our needs for quality, and it's going to allow it to occur in a matter of weeks instead of years. I currently submitted a journal article. It takes 2 to 3 years before it comes out, and I have to pay money to have it published. I'm with IEEE, one of the most reputable, large technical organizations on the earth. 3 years, I pay money, and they own the copyright. What? Where does that make any sense? I have to get permission from them to use my own material. Most of you are probably familiar with Lego blocks. If you have kids or grandkids, in my case, they make things out of Lego blocks. One of you has a neat idea to build a new Lego block. Is that possible? Sure. All you have to do is have the proper little pegs on top at the proper spacing, and then they fit, and you can go ahead and build something interesting. Well, this analogy of XML being our standard, so that you write something that satisfies the XML requirements, and then suddenly you're part of the Connexions system. If it doesn't, you put something in a PDF or Flash or something like that. Well, actually Flash you can, anything you do in HTML, you can embed it in Connexions. But if you just take a straight PowerPoint presentation or a straight PDF, no. But it doesn't have the interactivity, and it doesn't have the ease of modification that our XML system has. Now here is an example web view of a module on Fourier analysis. Fourier analysis happens to be very central to mathematics, to my discipline. So we've got little Connexions logo up here, and we notice that little over here, print PDF. You punch that button, this thing gets converted, for those of you that know this language, converted to LaTeX, converted to PDF, and then tossed out. But you don't see any of that. That's all done invisibly. And it doesn't have to go through LaTeX. There are alternative technologies. But the equations are all in MathML. Content MathML. And I'm going to say some more about that, but that is spectacular. And notice, David, personalization. Yep, I absolutely agree that not just reuse, but the ability to personalize it, localize it, crucial. We had some material on this Fourier analysis in English, and we have a fairly good analysis system to see how often things are used and where they're being used. So this particular module was used quite a bit. A group at the University of Texas at El Paso, which is heavily Mexican and Mexican-American. It's got about a third Mexican national, about a third Mexican-Americans, and about a third Anglos. Got some graduate students, the universal workhorse graduate students, to translate. But these are truly bilingual graduate students to translate. But see, they didn't have to do anything with the math. Math is not a language. It's a universal language. They didn't have to do anything with the structure or the curves or the figures or the references or anything like that. It's relatively straightforward. The usage of this just jumped. Most of it coming out of Latin America. Some coming out of Spain and a few other places on the earth that use Spanish. But suddenly they had access to some information they didn't have. Wow. So the usage jumped. We have a project now called Connections in the Americas. That we're going to have information simultaneously in English, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. And that constitutes about 99.9% of the languages in the Western Hemisphere. I think there may be a little bit of Dutch somewhere getting around, but mostly English, Spanish, and Portuguese. But there's enough people in Canada that we have to be careful and not aggravate them. Well, let's say the Americas is not what you're interested in. How about Thai, Japanese, Chinese? And what if you want to print it out looking like a journal article? All of that formatting done automatically because of XML. You'd like a different look and feel to the website, so there are three. Over here, choose a style. Those are examples. The NCPEA, which is an organization, a professional organization in the United States that teaches high school principals and superintendents. The highly specialized professional group with a bunch of content. They are using Connexions as their educational medium. Now notice, nowhere up there does it mention Connexions, or certainly not Rice. So it is completely branded by them, by that organization. What about this is a separate web page here. Teachers Without Borders. Now we've got a little bitty Connexions logo there to kind of tell people, oh yeah, this thing is powered by Connexions. The educator didn't want that. They wanted that to be a mystery. Fine, whatever. But down here, that doesn't look like a Connexions web page, but the underlying engine is Connexions, and all the modules are in Connexions. And by the way, Teachers Without Borders has chosen Connexions as their standard platform for distribution. Let me say just a couple of things about MathML. If you see a symbol X with a superscript 2, most of you in this room will say, ah yeah, X squared, X times X. A few of you who grew up in the world of literature and not math will say, "Ah, the footnote number 2, where is it?" And look around the bottom of the page and be aggravated because you can't find it. So the knowledge of mathematics is in your head. The information is on the paper. And for you to understand the information, you have to have a context, a background, an education, maybe even a training. And then you say, "Ah, yeah, x squared. I know what that is." Well, I would like to apply calculus and take the derivative of x squared. Click, 2x, which, by the way, is the derivative of x squared. This formulation of math means that part of the knowledge that previously resided in the reader has moved into the document. Now, you can't move all of it. The reader's got to have something, some context to interpret. But a great deal of math, because it is so highly structured, can be put into the document. You can evaluate a function. You can plot a function. You can take a function of a function. You can do all sorts of things. You can cut and paste it into Mathematica or Maple or one of the symbolic systems, and it works. Now, most math that you see is not math. It's a picture of mathematics. It's a GIF file, a JPEG file. It's literally a picture. You can't do anything with a picture. Well, you can. I mean, if you've got the knowledge of what it means, you can. But you can't do automatically. We want documents to be able to talk to documents and not have to go through a person as an intermediary. So ultimately, people are what's going to use it. Anyway, MathML, really difficult, really important. Chemistry, H2O, water. The markup language knows that 2 hydrogen atoms can combine with 1 oxygen atom and produce water. And other combinations are not allowed. And all these other weird organic chemistry things, there are rules. They come from the valence of the atoms and all kinds of other stuff that tell you what will work and what won't, and what energy levels and so on and so forth. That can be built into the markup language. Music. Once you have chosen, your signature, you have, in this case, what is that, I think 3/4 time, treble clef. You can write this down. With Music ML, you can change from a major key to a minor key. You can transpose it. You can do all sorts. You can even listen to it. And oh, by the way, if you were searching for something that was in an equation, if it's in MathML, you can find it. If it's a picture of a math equation, you can't find it. So the searchability desperately needs the metadata that XML allows. Now here is a picture of the web page showing the dynamic nature. Now this is an inverted pendulum. So it's a pendulum with a hinge at the bottom and a feedback system so that when it starts to fall over, the bottom moves into the top. And it's the same mechanism that when you rocket, when you're putting up a satellite or something, that you gimbal the engines at the bottom to keep the bottom under the top. I mean, it's just that simple. Not simple at all. But the people who design this, they can run a laboratory inside of Connexions, a virtual laboratory. And in many ways, it's much better than a physical laboratory because you can control parameters that you cannot control in a physical system. So the student at 2 a.m., located off in goodness knows where, can run this lab experiment. Maybe somebody that's not even registered for the course. It's available. Filtering. I do digital signal processing. The concept of filtering is always difficult for students. It's a hurdle. Once you understand it, it's clear. Before you understand it, it's very difficult. I want to pass this signal, remove high frequencies, and pass low frequencies. Because I know there's good stuff at the low frequencies and there's noise, bad stuff at the high frequencies. Here is an example. Down here at the bottom, I'm controlling the frequency. Right here. That's the filter type here. Here's the frequencies over here. That's the input, and here's the output. The student sits and plays with that. If they still don't understand it, as David pointed out, they need some help. They come and ask me. But the questions I get then become very good, well thought out questions, not like, I don't understand, which is kind of difficult to respond to. So the structure, the XML structure, allows putting material in that fits the kind of pedagogies and the theories that we currently have. The textbook is still rooted in technologies that are decades old, maybe even centuries old. Oh, by the way, if you study a little bit of the history of the book, it turns out that only 400 years ago, the idea of separating words and separating sentences and paragraphs came into being. Prior to that, there was just a string of symbols. Didn't even have vowels. I mean, it was constant. That's a little bit earlier. Constant, because it was simply reminding you of a story you already knew. And later, once they put in punctuation and vowels and sentences, you could read silently. That was a major change in education, when people didn't read aloud. Now, if you were all reading aloud, it would be kind of chaos in here, but that's the way it used to be. So what changes in technology are we using now that's going to allow a completely different kind of experience? Well, I think that's part of what this whole conference is about. Right here, you can build in assessment, either self-assessment by the student or assessment by the institution. And that can be very complicated or very simple. You know, Amazon.com, because I buy a lot of books. Ironic, I love books. Here I am trying to replace them. Because I buy a lot of books, Amazon says, you might be interested in ... Yeah, they profiled me. We can profile our students. Okay, you're a graphical learner. You know, you're an inductive learner. You're a deductive learner. How do I know that? By the pattern you have taken through the modules in understanding the material. The problem with Rich Baranuk's analogy with music is most of that vibrancy and most of that excitement is illegal. You're pulling stuff out of copyrighted material, putting it together, and using, and in some cases you're not sharing it in a legal way. You know, other musicians, they don't worry about law, they just have fun. Well, we as educators can't just go out and grab something off the web and put it into a book and then sell that book until you know where that came from and get a copyright release. You can't do that. So there's a huge problem with intellectual property that we discovered it, down the road. That wasn't in year one. So fortunately, we were involved with the very beginning of Creative Commons, and so we helped them. They helped us come up with the system that we currently use, which is the attribution only, the least restrictive. It's not non-restrictive, but I am restricting you to give me credit for doing the work. But you can sell it, you cannot sell it. So this book here, it's got on music theory, 83 pages, $6.34 over Amazon. So, it's a real book. It looks like a book, feels like a book, works like a book. Now it's actually kind of better because it has footnotes down here where it's converted all the hyperlinks to footnotes. And most, if you just print something off the web, that doesn't occur. Here is an example of a one chapter out of a book that's translated into Spanish. So we took one chapter out of this, translated into Spanish, and printed up one of these. When we went to the conference, the Global Engineering Education Conference in Rio last month, we handed out 50 of these just to say, okay, here's what could be. Now, granted, Brazil doesn't use Spanish, but fortunately, there are a number of people from Spain, from Spanish-speaking countries who were there, and it turned out most of the Brazilians can read Spanish, whether they speak it or not. So the physical book, let me just hand this around, and please, I need it back. Here's what the attribution 1.0 says. You can copy it, distribute it, display it, perform it, if it's music or a play or something, make derivative works. So you take that piece and you mess around with it and republish it. You can make commercial use. Cook, on the back of the book here, you'll see at the top a description of Connexions. At the bottom, you'll see a description of the printer. This is a .org, not for profit. The bottom one is a .com. Cook is a for profit. So we allow them to take material and print it. Well, some folks don't like that. But let me tell you why that's a good idea. If Cook decides they're going to do what other publishers have, and that is charge not $6, but $60, you just print it out yourself. There's always the alternative. If they aren't providing you enough value, and you know, one of the things that David said, and I often say, and a lot of people say, print it out free. It's not free. If you ever figured out how much your ink costs in your printer, and how much the paper costs, and how much the maintenance of that printer costs, it is not free, I promise you. The cost of the printers is actually below manufacturing costs because the money that Hewlett-Packard makes is more off of ink and paper than it is off of the printer. Now, those of you that are lawyers or like law, then you can read all the details of this and think that it's people like Lessig and Boyle and other Creative Commons people have got that pretty well cleaned up. Now, this all needs to be converted into the legal system in your country. Brazil has already done this. Vietnam, where we're doing, Vietnam has chosen Connexions as their national platform. And they're in the process of having their own internal legal system. So each country has to convert it into the legal system of that country. You can't just use a U.S. legal system in a country where it's nonsense. So what kind of outcomes? Well, Cook, another cute name, Q-O-O-P, will take the module information and they will convert it into the information necessary to print a book at whatever font, whatever layout you wish. And they'll take your credit card number and they will charge you and they'll FedEx it to you and all of that. So Connexions does not get involved with the commercial side of it. Cook does. Well, let's just say that Cook, by the way, they're nice people. But let's say that somebody who's not nice buys it. Then we also use Lulu Press. You can create your own press. If you think none of them are charging what's appropriate for the value they've added, then you create one. You can make it a .org, a .com, or a whatever. Google loves Connexions because the search companies are very interested in data that has metadata. It allows them to search in a much more effective way. So the next generation of Googles and Yahoos and Microsoft and search systems are not just going to be matching words and page counts. It's going to be tied to the data about the data. So the richness that XML allows. HTML will allow metadata, but it's awkward. XML is built to embrace it. What are open issues? Well, math is still a problem. See that equation right up there? That much markup language is necessary to describe it. And the first time I saw that, I said, that's awful. Somebody's just not a good programmer. Turns out it's not. Describing mathematics unambiguously is very difficult. Most of you can read a music score. Turned out music scores are ambiguous. If you don't have some training, you don't really know how to interpret those symbols. Chemistry, chemistry is awful. Just absolutely awful. But there are markup languages being created. They're verbose. Bunch of language there to describe one equation. That's absolutely necessary. Okay, what about some of our current status? How much content is the commons? What kind of, who's using it? Well, right now, there are 3,567, as of a few weeks ago, individual modules published. Now, if you are an author, when you sign up for an authorship, you get a workspace. There's probably 3 times that amount of information in people's private workspaces that they haven't, quote, published yet. But I don't let it go out until I'm pretty happy, and my grad students are happy, and my colleagues are happy. Then I hit the punch button, the publish button. Because if you publish something and you later say, oh my gosh, it's wrong, I want it back. I mean, it's just sitting over there in the repository, I want it back. You don't get it back. Part of the agreement, when you put it in there, is that it is there forever. Now you can publish a correction, very much like paper publishing. If you publish an article and it turns out something wrong with it, you can't call it back and say, unprint that. You have to publish a separate correction. So there's a history. Let's just say, well, anyway, I'll get a little further. There are something like 200,000 unique visits per month. And by the way, most people enter the Commons not through our portal, not through our, but through Google. They'll say circle of fifths, which is a music term. Up comes that book, the modules that make up that book, or certain Fourier analysis, or something, whatever it is. If it's in Connections, Rich calls that, I think he calls it high Google karma. Google likes our structure. It likes the metadata, so it ranks it fairly highly. Most of this is outside of Rice. So Rice University has a total of 4,000 students. It's a little bitty university. So this is not something for Rice. It's not even necessarily by Rice, it's by the community. And you'll see, maybe one or two slides here even mentions my university. My president gripes at me about that, but he wants more branding. And I explain, no, a little bit of branding is okay, but heavy branding, not good. Now, this is the music book that's going right. What are we doing for time? Okay. Kitty Schmidt-Jones, a stay-at-home mother of 3 children, lives in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, up in the cornfields of Illinois. She homeschools her children. She teaches them at home. She's also a music teacher. There is no reason in the world that she should have any national or international reputation. 600,000 page views. So they're not hits, you don't any more hits, but actual page views of her material each month. Now, if that isn't a positive statement for why open education, if she had published traditionally, that little book, if she had published it, it would cost 5 times as much. She would sell maybe a few thousand, but probably a few hundred copies, and nobody would know Kitty Jones. I was at a conference in Lithuania of librarians, and a fellow from Mongolia came up and said, oh, I love Kitty Jones's music books. They're beautiful. We use them in our music schools. And I thought, oh my gosh. In Mongolia, using this book written by this woman up in the Midwest that would have no status as a traditional author. Who credentialed her? Who told her she could publish? Who's making any money? Nobody. She's making an impact probably more than almost any other music teacher in the world. That's one of the modules out of her work. That is her book on Amazon. That's not a Connections webpage, that's an Amazon. So you go find Kitty Jones' work on Amazon. How is the number of modules growing? Well, here it goes, starting off in 2000. That's a slight exponential curve there, because it's growing quite nicely. But here's a more interesting one. Will people reuse modules? Will they write a new one of their own because they're just kind of self-centered? Or will they take somebody else's and improve it? Turns out, I mean, that was an open question. This is reuse here. All of that takes here's our 3,400 modules that I showed you in the last term. Actually, we've got 16,000 modules in there, but some of them are revisions of the first. Oh, and by the way, all of the history is held. If I write a module and then you modify it, and I thought, I don't like your modification, you messed up my idea, I just simply always, when I use it, I use my original one. So all of them are numbered. You can find any of them. The revisions, Sometimes they do what's called forking. They come along and I say, you have messed it up so badly, I don't want my name associated with it. Fine, I like it. So you fork off a new entity, and it then lives in the repository. 27% of the modules have more than 5 versions. So they've been modified more than 5 times. That's what we had hoped for, and that's what in fact happened. 6 new authors a day, mostly in science and technology, but the music book, completely an unintended consequence. This woman, her husband happens to be a double E at the University of Illinois. She saw this technology he was using and said, tell me about it. And he did, and she said, I can use that. So she sat down and learned how to use Connexions and put music into it without any background that would make that expected. A lot of use, a lot of material. What's in the future? Well, a more automated. Right now, there has to be some human intervention in the creation of those books. What we want to have is that when you go to a course, in contrast to a module, but you go to a course, which is a collection of modules, that you can say, buy a book, punch a button, and Cook will pop up and ask your credit card number and how many books and da-da-da-da. So that right now is still involves people, but it will, like in the next 2 or 3 months, will be completely automated. We've got moderately good editing tools. And by the way, all of our tools are open source, so if you don't like them, fix them. We want them to be better. We have a LabVIEW plate. Those 2 dynamic examples that I showed you involve some technology that a company called National Instruments in Austin, Texas is providing free, the player. They don't provide free the software that generates it. It's just like Adobe and the Acrobat Reader. Acrobat Reader is free. Why are they giving it away free? Because then you buy Acrobat to create the information, or you license it to somebody or something like that. Sustainability. At break time, I was talking about the word open and the word free. Those are dangerous words. Richard Stallman, a bizarre human being, but Richard Stallman at MIT talks about free as in people, not beer. And what he's saying is free beer does not exist. So free in the sense of no cost is an illusion. Somebody, somewhere, whether it's the taxpayer or society or the next generation or the past generation, somebody pays for everything. But who gets charged is the question. If it's provided for by taxes, then that's where the money comes from, and I can provide it for you free, in quotation. However, free as in freedom is a different animal. We want the information to be free. And actually, information, we want free in both senses. But books, no, they're not free. I mean, somebody's going to pay for the printing of those books. And even you, when you think it's free, you print it out on your printer. It takes you 2 or 3 hours to print out a book. And your time, isn't it worth something? And the ink, and the paper, and the fact that it looks like a book you printed out on your printer. We're working with K through 12 textbook folks. We're now working with university presses, and I don't know the status in Europe of or South America of university presses, but in the U.S. they are the highest quality presses that exist. They're more contrary and difficult than everything else. So they are developing this post-review, post-publication review system, and it works. Financing, we've depended on Rice University, the Hewlett Foundation, and some other private sources, but eventually it has to sustain itself. We cannot be going to foundations and agencies in the long run. So a sustainability model, we were talking a bit earlier about business models. Most academics don't understand what that means. It's very important to have a viable business plan. And nowadays, most foundations won't patent won't give you any money unless you can show that eventually you'll be self-sustaining. That's the organization of our group. Thank you very much.